Okay, and welcome everybody to this evening's or this afternoon's session on community engagement. And it's good practice based on the Alliance for Scotland's recent report. I'm just going to let somebody else into the room. There we go. I'm delighted that we have Anna Lawrence from Random Forest Research and Morag Paterson from Talking Forest join us today, whom both were commissioned by ASR to write the report as independent consultants. CWA felt that both Anna and Morag would be experts on community engagement and the ideal presenters to help you, our members, think about how you do community engagement in your context. Anna previously has also had her own personal involvement with CWA, having previously been on the board, and I believe also as chair, Anna. And I'll ask both presenters, though, to introduce themselves briefly at the start so you know the level of expertise that they're bringing to this session today. Before we begin, though, I'd ask that you allow me to share with you briefly a little bit about the Community Woodlands Association, as we have a few members joining us today. So we help communities connect to their woodland, which is exactly why you're here today, to connect with your woodlands. We've over 200 members, most of whom are community groups owning or managing woodlands in Scotland. One of the benefits of being a member of Community Woodlands Association is that we advocate in the political arena on behalf of our members. So, for example, we're currently responding to the deer control consultation on behalf of our members. We provide support and advice to communities who are looking to start up a community woodland group or who have already got their own woodland and are looking for ongoing support. We listen to our members' needs and then support them with training sessions, exchange visits, mentoring programmes, and we also have an annual conference. We have Piers Voicey in our team, our professional forester, who's able to provide paid advice and consultancy to any groups should they need that. And we work in partnership with strategic partners across Scotland to make it easier for our communities to be actively involved in woodland management. So if you aren't already a member, then you might wish to either encourage your woodland group to become members or indeed become an individual member yourself. And to do that, you can scan the QR code on the screen, or I'll share a link to our webpage in the chat for you to access. So without any further delay, let's get started. Please take over the controls, Anna or Morag, whichever one of you are good. Hey, and welcome both of you. Lovely to have you here with us.
Thanks, Sharon. And you said you wanted us to say a word or two about ourselves, so I'm going to do that and then invite Morag to do that, and then I'll head straight into the presentation. So hello, everybody. My name's Anna Lawrence, and yes, indeed, I am a member of CWA, and I was on the board for 6 years, and I was the chair for 3 years. And so it's nice to be back. And I have to say, things are getting really professional now I've left. So it's all looking really good. So yeah, community woodlands, I've spent 35 years doing various kinds of research and yeah, but kind of community-led research with community woodlands in a whole load of countries, first in international development and then within forest research, and now more independently. So so I kind of bring that kind of bridging across different contexts and looking at how participation and engagement works in different places and different types of woodlands. So that's part of the perspective I was bringing to this. Morag, do you want to say something?
I'll just go quickly. Yep, I'm Morag Paterson. I'm an independent consultant as well. Most of my expertise around community engagement primarily comes from being an artist and a photographer, but for the last few years, I've been working on communities and forestry, particularly with respect to community engagement, and that's been a mixture of working with Anna across several projects and also through a kind of lot of lived experience, because we live in an area with a lot of forest applications. And I'm always also a member of Communities for Diverse Forestry, so we offer a bit of help and support to communities looking to engage. I think that's probably enough from me for now.
Okay, thanks, Morag. And I will, if I'm doing this correctly, am I doing this correctly? Are you now seeing my first? Just let me know that it's all fine, because it all looks so different from my end. Okay, brilliant. Okay, this is what we're here to talk about today. This is the report that Morag and I wrote for the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforests. We were asked to do it as a initially to provide a standard or best practice guidelines, and as we worked through this with the members of the Alliance, we all collectively felt that good practice guidance rather than creating a new standard was the most useful thing, because it's such a fluid field, and one that really rests on learning processes and moving forward together. So it evolved into good practice guidelines. Without knowing everybody that's here and knowing why you're here, I'm not sure whether you're here for the emphasis on community engagement or the emphasis on community engagement in rainforest restoration. And I'm going to just proceed with an emphasis on both of those, but really what we're here to talk about is community engagement. And to say that it was commissioned by the Alliance for Scotland's Rainforests, because that's not what they do so much. They're starting to do a lot more of it, but for them it was a relatively new thing, and for some of you it will be something that you do almost every day of your lives. So hopefully there's something here that will stimulate discussion, prompt new ideas for you, but we're setting it in the context of good practice guidance for an alliance of government agencies, NGOs, and a range of other organisations who are coming into the landscapes where rainforests are being restored in Scotland, and wanting to work much more effectively with the communities. So that's the kind of starting point for what we're doing here. Now, why do we do this work? Why did they commission it? So they want to be doing community engagement. They want to be making sure that the community benefits from landscape scale ecological restoration, and we wanted to make sure that the guidance fits the particular context of really the west of Scotland, and the way that we'll talk about it today, I hope will expand it from that to the rest of Scotland. It's not, I'm not quite progressing it right, Sharon. Is that okay? Yeah, I'm not used to the controls being quite this way around, so just bear with me if I don't quite do it right. What did we put into the guidance? We drew on international experience because we wanted to look quite widely. This intersection of ecological restoration and community engagement was something that there's a lot of experience across the world, and we wanted to draw on that quite widely, and also to relate it to national policy and the experience of the Alliance's projects. But something that we really emphasised ourselves was that engagement in this context, when you're looking across wide landscapes and you're working with communities who live in those landscapes, which applies to almost all community woodlands in Scotland, that you really need to be evolving as you go. You can't just say, we're going to do engagement, we'll just have a consultation, that's it, tick the box and on we go, and now we know what we're going to do. It's something that will continue. It's an evolving relationship in terms of how you relate with the community and with the woodland or the landscape that you're working in. I just put up one example of a definition that's out there when we talk about community engagement, and wanted to, this was just a reminder to me as well, to point out there's a lot of guidance out there, there's a lot of standards that already exist, and in some ways one of our questions for the Alliance was, why have new guidance? And as I said, all of this relating across landscapes, and the fact that the relationship between the community and the landscape is evolving as the community engages with it and manages the woodland or the landscape. That is an evolving process, so it needs a particular kind of rather dynamic and interactive guidance. So that's what we're bringing to it, not a hard and fast standard or rules about how to do engagement, and not a reiteration of stuff that already exists, but something quite fluid. And I wanted to put in 3 take-home messages. and this is kind of like the beginning and the end of everything that we want to say today, that sustainable communities, especially when we're talking about community woodland communities, are part of sustainable landscapes. We need the one to be sustainable for the other to be sustainable. The engagement is an evolving relationship, and I've already said that. But also when you start engaging and when you start doing ecological restoration, both of those processes bring us into the realms of the unknown. You don't know what's going to happen when you really bring people freely together without a very fixed idea of what the project's going to be or what the outcome is going to be. Then you're moving towards a moving target and you're learning together. So we produced the guidance, and it was something that was produced with the members and by through interviews, including interviews with the communities that the members work with. So it's quite community informed. It's very experiential, very experience informed. And we thought a lot about how to structure this guidance. So we introduced it with a rationale, what I've just explained about the relationship between the community and the landscape evolving. We developed principles, and then we structured according to those principles, so that we then gave examples of experience for each of those principles. And then our methodological, our process guidelines are based on questions. They're not saying you must tick this box, you must do this, but they're saying, have you thought about this? They're asking the questions of, have we thought about how we're dealing with conflict? Or have we thought about how to reach the people who don't normally come to meetings? So we'll show you those questions at the end and then open it up for discussion so that we can explore how those questions sit with you and see if you want to talk about any other part of the presentation. So if you're looking at the guidance, and I think Sharon's either put a link in or you're going to put a link in.
If you need,
yeah, great, thanks. So if you need just one thing from the guidance, go to section 4, because that's where the kind of the bit to get your teeth into sits. So you can look at that. Okay, so these are the themes that we structured the whole guidance under. First of all, we focused on community. What is the community? What is community benefit? And then what is community engagement? Because we felt that you needed to really understand those two things first. What community we're talking about, and what kind of benefits might the community get before you can start talking about community engagement. And obviously it's a circular process, because you also use engagement to identify who is the community and who's benefiting. And then defining governance and pointing to the principle of participatory monitoring and evaluation, and then the question of support and resources. So these are the principles that we established in the guidance for the community. There's obviously a lot of theory written about community and a lot of different definitions of community, and a lot of toing and froing about, are we talking about community of place or community of interest? And that can become a bit too theoretical, but for this and for the purposes of community woodlands as well, I think we settled on the community being the people who live in the landscapes and their organisations. So that would include, for example, the community councils, any community development trust, and special interest organisations who sit within those communities. So those structures are part of the community as well. And they're going to be diverse and they're going to be overlapping. And it's important to look at all of those different components of the community in order to make sure that you're being inclusive. We had a bit that pointed to the Gaelic heritage of the communities. This is particularly in the context of rainforest restoration, because the rainforest areas in Scotland are all in the west. That doesn't necessarily apply to, of course, to all community woodlands in Scotland. And we asked people to question and to be open to the possibility that landowners are or are not part of the local community. And it very much depends on whether the landowners live in the community and people's relationship with the landowners. And often there will be many small-scale landowners who are also part of the community. But it's something that needs to be proactively considered rather than assumptions made one way or the other. And And an example that we included there was Glen Creran. This isn't a community woodland example, but it's an example where in order to restore the rainforest, it was important to get rid of all the invasive rhododendron. And in order to do that, the community had to identify every last garden owner and small landowner in order to get people's permission and involvement in clearing the rhododendron. Community benefits. Again, we're still on definitions and principles here. Community benefit is hugely helped as a concept because the Land Commission, Scotland's Land Commission, has produced some really good work on this, and our guidance links to that. You can find links there, and they've discussed it quite thoroughly and pointed to the need for benefits. Community benefits don't just happen; they need to be intentional. They need to be additional to what would have happened without planning for them, and you need to be able to identify them. And they need to be delivered to and with the community and integrated into the community groups and plans. So they're not something, and remember that these guidelines were written largely for people who would be bringing projects from the outside. And it's a reminder to them that you can't sit outside the community and identify what the benefits are. You need to identify them together, and they need to be deliberate, not just something that you hope is going to happen. And an example of that we included there was Trees for Life and their carbon funding, which they then turned into a local community fund. So that's a very it's an interesting comparison with wind farm community benefit funds. It's not very common in forestry or in woodlands. And Trees for Life are kind of leading the way in doing that in a forestry context. So then we come to community engagement and defining the principles of community engagement in this guidance. And we didn't have to say this. It was already specified by the people commissioning the guidance that community engagement is at the collaborative and empowering end of the spectrum. I'm sure you've all heard of phrases like the ladder of participation and different typologies of participation, and ones where you're just consulting and then going your way with having consulted once and then doing what you were going to do are not included in this type of guidance. It's something much more involving and also, as I said before, leading to an ongoing and developing relationship. So it's not something that just is a one-off or static. It's something that keeps on going and evolving. It, of course, needs good communication and governance. It's based on practice as well as dialogue, and that's something that people emphasised. A lot of the interviews emphasise that it's not just about talking. You have to actually get out into the woodland and do stuff together in order to learn about each other's values and knowledge of the woodland and to learn together. As I've said several times, it's based on an adaptive learning approach. You have to be willing to move and be flexible and to adjust your goals. It might need staff training because not everybody comes to projects and or community woodlands already having all the skills that you need for community engagement. And it also recognises that communities can't do everything. Sometimes there's a feeling or an assumption that if you're going to do engagement, it's almost like handing over everything to the community without necessarily providing the support to do that. So an example there, this is a nice example. I'm going to just go back here because we referred to creativity as well as science as being part of the process of engaging. And this again was emphasised in the interviews and in the examples that we looked at, that finding creative ways for people to interact with the woodlands and to interact with each other around the topic of woodland was a very helpful component of so that I keep going back to the previous one. So the picture there is when the Native Americans from Brazil came to Kilmonaghan woodlands, and this example is also actually from Kilmonaghan woodlands, a very creative woodland, where they're doing acting and participatory theatre in the woods. So then this is the fourth principle, was governance, and we felt that you couldn't actually have guidance on community engagement without being clear about what governance means, and without recognizing that the two belong together. So community engagement needs to fit with the existing established methods of doing community governance. So, for example, the community council and other decision-making processes that already exist. And if there's a project, also how that project governance works. So the indicators that you need for delivering against outputs and targets, and to refer to transparency, legitimacy and accountability, so that there's good standards for the governance, but also to recognise the informal component of governance as well as the formal. So how people are together and how the relationships are in meetings and what kind of meetings you have are also an important part of governance. And Morag put these examples in, and I'm just suddenly having a blank spot there. That's right. So this wonderful example, ACT, is it has a is it an advisory board or a board of trustees, Morag? Just remind me. Nod at one of them.
I'm just trying to think whether it's the board or the steering group.
Yes.
But anyway,
I'm scrolling down the notes and it says board. So the board has specified places for people who are actually from the communities that they're working with. And that's a very good way to build in community engagement into the governance structures. It means that you don't have the separation between different organisations having different boards and then trying to have relationships with each other. But if you sit on each other's boards and you get people co-opted onto the boards of trustees, that can be a good way to ensure better community engagement. And now this is one of my hobby horses. That so this was the fifth principle, that community engagement needs to have participatory monitoring and evaluation. What does this mean? It's basically saying nobody can decide if the community engagement is successful or if the community woodland management is successful on their own. You need to not only have people engaging in making decisions about the woodland and doing stuff in the woodland and benefiting from the woodland, but you also need engagement in deciding whether it was successful, because different people will have different perceptions, different needs and different ways of deciding was it good or not. And this is actually, it's so powerful and it's often not referred to. When you start talking about participatory monitoring and evaluation, you often have to move away from a very kind of quantitative, how are we going to measure that kind of approach, and think much more about storytelling, visual approaches, and using examples and qualitative approaches to deciding whether something has been successful, finding new ways of communicating with each other about your different perceptions. And it also usually means that you may need to actually change your targets. It's not necessarily like I'm going to be cheeky here. It's not necessarily like the Scottish government saying we can't hit our net zero targets, so we're going to drop the targets. It's saying, oh, we've achieved this, we've learned from that, this works, this doesn't work, so the next phase we'll have new targets, or we'll change the targets, or we'll tweak our ways of doing things. So it's a very participatory process, but it's also moving forward in a flexible and learning style. And we included in the report one example of that from Arcade Community Forest, where they use very informal ways of going for walks together to catch up and to talk about how it's going. So that's a really important strand. It's getting away from the have we achieved this, counting the number of participants that came or counting the number of trees that have been planted, and it's using an informal interaction to actually just check in with each other and see how it's going, but it's built into their processes as a way of operating. And the last of our principles, it's not quite the same as the principles, but it needed to be there, is to say that community engagement needs to be resourced. And as I said at the beginning, these guidelines were written for an alliance, a partnership of people who are usually the ones who are initiating projects from outside, so they needed to be reminded that the community themselves can't come to meetings without a bit of help. People are often giving their time for free. They need resources to help them get to the meetings, to help them do things. And that actually needs to be in the budget, and also to budget for enough staff time to be able to do those meetings as well. So that's just a reminder in there for something that gets overlooked if you're talking sometimes by conservation groups who are focusing more on the species than the processes. So we included that there. So that's the principles section of the guidance, and I wanted to spend a bit of time on that because we actually found it necessary to actually build that up from scratch through the interviews and through applying sort of first principles and asking what's really important here. And I feel like we actually disentangled something quite useful by going back and defining those principles and saying what those principles looked like when they were working well. But that's almost like the theoretical part. And then there's a section where those principles are illustrated from examples. And in this presentation, we've mixed them in with what I just presented. And then we move to the bit which is actually the how to do it. And the way that we did that is quite different from any participation manual that I've ever written before, or from most of the ones that I've seen. And I found myself sort of needing to explain why we did it. And it was really because we were working in a situation where everybody's sort of moving forwards into the great unknown. It's partly that we're living in a world which is very uncertain, and we've got climate change, we've got a lot of policy change that seems to keep changing, we've got land reform, we've got all sorts of things that keep shifting. So the context in which we're doing rainforest restoration or community woodlands is changing, and we need to enable ourselves to be flexible and to see, are we pointing in the right direction? Are we learning from experience? And it's also that this was commissioned by people who are, at least in the context of this partnership, interested in ecological restoration, in landscape scale ecological restoration. And I didn't say, but I originally am an ecologist, and as soon as you start doing restoration, you actually also don't know what the result's going to be, and it's in a changing world. And we don't know what's going to grow well when you take the grazing off, or when you encourage natural regeneration or whatever. So both of those factors, the kind of social and the ecological, are they're sort of almost heroic advances into this incredibly uncertain world that we live in. So to set fixed guidelines on how to do engagement and see it as something with a beginning, middle, and an end just didn't seem right in this particular context. Also, there's a lot of guidance out there with methods and tools already written, and we provide pointers to those. So we wanted something that really emphasised this how do we learn together approach. How do we recognise that we often start without a clue where we're going and how to do it, and how we can change our targets, change our objectives as we learn together and as we achieve things in the woodland. So that was my wee off-the-cuff explanation for why we based it on questions. So I wanted to pause there and just say, because I can see that some of you have turned up since we started, and just say, are there any questions so far? So that's the kind of the bulk of the report, and now I'm going to show you the question-led approach. But I just wanted to see, and I'll get I'll invite Morag to answer all the questions.
Folks, please do come in, either put your hand up or just turn your camera on and chip in if you've got any questions. We're talking about community. It would be great if we could build that sense of community in this session as well, and engage together. Feel free as we go to add questions to the chat as well, please.
And if you don't fancy it now, there's plenty of chance in about 5 minutes. So you got fair warning. Okay, so I'll just go straight on to everybody's having their tea or feeling shy. So that's one more arrival. Okay. So I'll just go straight on. So this is the kind of nuts and bolts of the guidance, and as I said at the beginning, it's section 4 of the guidance. And if you feel like you know all the stuff that I just presented, or you don't really need to spend time thinking about it, that's where I would go, straight to the question-led part. But remembering that we have these 6 principles, and we structured the questions around the 6 principles as well, or the 6 themes. So here we go. The first one was community. And I'm not going to read out all of these questions. I'm just showing you the kind of things that we included in the guidance. So this is the kind of process. And I should say that that there are people testing out this process now, using this guidance, and they're going to come back and report back on how they've used it and how it's helped them, hopefully, and what they've learned from it. But it's basically saying, instead of saying you must invite everybody, or you must make sure that you've included people from all of these sections of the community, instead it's a much more open-ended approach, saying, do we understand who the people are, who the communities are, who the organisations are? Have we understood who the most important people to get on board, so that they then encourage other people to come? So these are the kind of questions that we're asking. So those are the questions with the community. I'm going to go really fast through them, and then we're going to pause and look at them in more detail. These are the questions we encourage people to ask about community benefits. Again, reminding them that that community benefits need to be deliberate, not just additional. Encouraging people to think about them contributing to community wealth, so building up assets for the community, and defining those with the community. Engagement, obviously, quite a lot to say about engagement. In fact, we had 2 sets of questions about engagement, and looking at the processes of engagement, communication, this word agency, how much agency does the community have? So that's how much power or effectiveness does the community feel that it has in making decisions? And then questions of tensions and conflict. And then we had questions for the community woodland or the facilitators to ask themselves and to ask others about governance. Are we working with existing structures? Are we being accountable? Are we being transparent? Are we looking at the informal aspects of governance as well, the friendly culture, etc.? And we had a set of questions around participatory monitoring and evaluation. Who's been involved in defining the targets? Who's measuring them? Have we got ways of talking to each other about our different perceptions of success? Have we got ways for learning with hindsight, looking back and seeing how well things worked? And then there's questions about resources. We wanted to make sure those are in there, especially for people who are using this guidance, who might be managing projects and needing to convince their chief executives that there needs to be money in the budget for these processes, because they don't just happen by themselves. So that was the question-led approach, and we thought if we were going to open it up for discussion, that we could pick 1 or 2 of these questions and just see how people feel about them, what their experience of using, of thinking about these aspects is, and whether you've got feedback or experiences you'd like to share. So for this one, we suggested you might like to talk about who's getting involved, who's holding back, and what might the reasons be for non-inclusion. But you can choose any of the questions, and we'd love to hear from you. So we're opening up for discussion now. Would love to hear a bit of feedback from yourselves.
Don't be shy, folks. It could be anything, you know, it could be specifically talking about an experience you've got of one of these questions or anything associated with it, you know, very much sharing your experience with others as well as asking a question per se, expecting an answer. Oh, you're on mute, Sharon.
I have a question for you, and it's from observations that I've seen whilst in my role, that quite often the whole bit about who's getting involved and who's holding back, sometimes within community woodland groups, there might be a core group of people who are very vociferous. They might have strong opinions, strong ideas and vision about where they want the community woodland to grow. And others might feel a little bit inhibited or a little bit unsure about getting involved because they don't necessarily have the same opinions or the same approach or the same confidence. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on how the community woodland groups best manage that kind of situation.
Would you like to share, Morag, because you've had a lot of experience in your own community doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no set way to do it, but obviously engagement does rely on good interpersonal skills and kind of keeping up to date with how we speak to each other, because obviously that's changed a lot over the last decades and even the last few years. So I guess it might be, you know, if you're saying there's particularly vociferous people, which might be slightly off-putting to others, then maybe you kind of make sure those people are always balanced out by slightly more open people and maybe more gentle people. You know, and starting meetings by or whatever the engagement is, by sort of talking about there not being a hierarchy and that everyone's opinion is really important, and that no question is too stupid, no opinion is invalid. You know, and trying to kind of set up conversations to make sure they don't kind of descend into people with different opinions feeling antagonized. Does that help at all?
No, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. It's always good to hear how it works in context, isn't it? It can be quite difficult for some people to manage.
Yeah, and I think just to add, I think Anna's coming in, and this is especially one of the reasons to have all these different types of engagement as well. You know, so you're not just having the meetings around a table or a face-to-face sort of people behind a row of tables and then an audience. You know, having these different ways, walks and talks, and lots of other activities in the forest that become essentially informal meetings, but they're not posed as that. You know, so people can gather and find things in common. And then let the conversation evolve a bit more naturally, perhaps.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm actually thinking of things that you've done as well, and that other people have done, where you've had stalls at like agricultural shows and other, you know, not necessarily a meeting specially about the community woodland, but a chance to chat with people who might not otherwise have shared their thoughts about it. And also some of this creative and artistic or theatrical stuff, it brings in people who might come for different reasons and express their views through different approaches.
Yeah, it brings a very different entry point to people across a sort of wider interest set, as it were. Yeah, and as Anna said as well, going to other events that people are already at and things they regularly do that are nothing to do with your forest, so they can come up and approach you, is a really great way of getting more people into the conversation.
Thank you.
And those classic methods, I'm sorry, kind of this is you see, each of these questions can open up such a lot, and that's partly why we did it in this way, was because it opens things up. It's not telling people what to do, it's more inviting people to consider how you might address that question. But there's also classic methods like just making sure that you give everybody a voice. So you go around the table. If you're in a meeting, you go around the table and let everybody say something, and you'll still have the people who don't want to express dissent because other people are very strong in their views. So then you might also want things where people can write something on a post-it and stick it up anonymously, and then that gives people a chance to express maybe reservations or to suggest wackier ideas that they thought might get shouted down if they said them in public. We used that at our recent conference, didn't we? So there's always the people who are happy to talk in front of 100 other people, and there are those who are very thoughtful and have got some really useful ideas, but they don't share them because the idea of speaking out in front of everybody else is excruciating. So those are kind of like typical ways of addressing it.
Yeah, I think the ideas bank, you know, that you've just mentioned is a great way, because once people see what other people are putting on the ideas bank as well, then they may feel like their suggestion is more relevant and it's possible, because it's that when it's a blank page, a lot of people feel like they don't know enough, or it might be a stupid idea, you know, and you really just want to get over that hurdle. So even just pre-populating some things like that with a few different ideas across a real scale of different thought or activity can then help other people to be able to add to it.
Is that what you call it, an ideas bank?
No, so we just done in our place planning activity locally. So and it's worked really well. And it doesn't. It can be really possible, immediately doable things, or much more ambitious. We'd have to plan for 10 years and get loads of funding. You know, everything's kind of welcome. Yeah.
Jane, in you come.
Hi there. I've been involved myself in a few community organisations, and I've often found that in relation to question 3 on this page about engaging with the community council and the local community development trust if they exist, often the community council can be like this almost controlling council, or a group of sort of village elders who must not be questioned and must always be respected, and are kind of the gatekeepers of everything, I feel. And when I've been a new member of a community and tried to introduce something new, I've often found that quite a challenge, and often a stumbling block, and can just put paid to some enthusiasm if you've got some younger people want to get involved, that kind of thing. Have you any tips or experience for how to engage with them but not allow them to become the controlling or stumbling block?
I'm going to invite Morag to answer that one as well. I've just moved to a new community and just went to my first community council meeting 2 weeks ago. so I can kind of relate to several strands of what you're saying, Jane. But yeah, Morag's much more of an old hand, so I'll let her answer.
Yeah, I'm a long-term community councillor, and we are very, very open, and we'll bite anyone's hand off who walks in the door. In fact, you try not to get elected to the community council, you're doing pretty well. It's a really tricky one, but I suppose you can always, if you do come across a group that seem to be a bit more controlling, you can always throw it back to them and ask how they would like you to interact and talk to them, because then that takes them out of their normal mindset, maybe of like seeing a proposal and saying it's all wrong, or and then have to come back to you in a different way. I mean, again, it goes back to your governance, doesn't it, on whether they can take control or not. They can only really take control if they outnumber everybody else in your governance structures, I would say. Although I guess there's the theoretical taking control and then the kind of literal taking control. It's a tricky one. It really is, and managing people in small communities can be tough. But I think ask them how they would like to interact, and then just try and make sure you have balanced representation in any governance structures. So it's a bit of a woolly answer. It's not an easy one, and I think there is an element of feeling your way in that as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks. That does help. It helps to know I'm not alone.
yeah, no, I can imagine. And also it comes back to that participatory monitoring and evaluation thing there as well. You know, if you set up some frameworks in that for reviewing all of your kind of and procedures, it should be relatively easy to set a few things in that which would really obviously flag up if people are becoming too controlling, you know, in quite a sort of structured way that hopefully people don't get too defensive about, because it will just sort of plop out into your evaluations, and then hopefully they kind of see it for themselves. I don't
know. One of our community woodland groups at our conference last year said that their group had made the decision, their board had made the decision that because it was a small community, that actually they weren't going to have couples on as trustees, because they had at one point 3 sets of couples, and therefore it made it very, very difficult to have that kind of wider opinion and wider approach of thinking about what they were going to do, because they came with joint mindset about suggestions and ideas. So that was a decision that was made, put into their governance, that was not going to be allowed any longer. They could both be members or trustees, but not at the same time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you could also get the opposite, where they're arguing.
Well, yes.
But that's a good example of being reflective and letting the process sort of evolve and changing the rules as you kind of learn from experience.
Yeah. And I think actually changing the rules is a good thing to do, because quite often these rules are made and people stick with them come hell or high water, but actually we change and communities change. And as you said, Morag, how we communicate changes, that actually the rules need to change as well to meet modern day society.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just realised, Anna, it's 12 minutes to 5 and we're only on the first question page.
Well, that's that's because we've got lots to say about it. Was it really? Yes. Okay. I mean, I would love to hear from some of the participants whether they want to chip in. It's great to hear from Jane. So these are really just invitations. You know, we've set out the kind of the 6 principles. If you've got anything you'd like to say, we suggested this one is quite an interesting one, where the benefits contribute to community wealth rather than just you know, does the woodland make us feel good, or is it helping to build up resources and assets for the community for the future? Has anybody got something they'd like to share on that? Or Morag and Sharon, you're great at sharing. The thing is, everybody's part of a community, so we've all got experience of
we had a, sorry for hogging this, it's not my intention.
No, I like you hogging, it's great.
We did a virtual session a fortnight ago with Isle of Wight about, they actually were involved in 2 sessions in the same week, one on seed collection and one on wood creation. And actually the whole community benefit from their community engagement was enormous, not just from that sense of community and that participatory aspect, but the fact that they were planting their trees from their own seeds that they had gathered, and then they were selling off the woodland, which was creating assets for the local community, which was allowing them to build buildings. And it was just a really tremendous enterprise that they had created as a small community. And they started off, and forgive me because I can't remember how many years ago, but with maybe 60 people on the island, and now they've got 120. So actually that sense of community and that self-perpetuating growth has allowed people to stay or move to the island, which has obviously been seen as something really positive for the residents. So they had a really good example of actually how that community wealth has grown and the enterprises they've created on the island.
Yeah, that's a brilliant example, Sharon. And I think that was something that really got flagged up in the interviews and made its way into some of the examples, is that the kind of community wealth and assets and enterprises really doesn't have to be directly related to the forest. You know, you can work a lot more laterally with kind of spin-offs that might work. You know, and I think, for example, the Woodland Trust were helping out with affordable housing in one of the projects they're working on. You know, so thinking outside the box on this can be very, very helpful as well.
Yeah.
And again, having to convince the large conservation organisation that this is a relevant part of their activities was an interesting part of community engagement as well. I'm going to skip on. I've just noticed that there are people who came to the meeting after you put those links in the chat, so they may not be seeing the chat. I don't know if it works the same in Teams as
Do you know,
Zoom.
I don't know if you join after. I can't remember what the
in Zoom you
are.
can't. Yeah, in Zoom if you join after that, you don't see the chat that went on before you joined. But anyway, I'm going to rattle on. Just see if anybody feels inspired to pipe up. For engagement, we took this one as an example to talk about other tensions or conflicts. I would be amazed. Does anybody want to tell us about a community that doesn't have tensions or conflicts? But how can we better understand the causes? Have we got processes for resolving them? So instead of saying, you must do this, you must identify the conflicts and you must do X, Y, and Z in order to resolve it, we were basically inviting people to reflect on what processes might be helping and for understanding where they could be doing that. Does anybody want to? Anybody in the audience want to share something there?
I was going to say we've touched on it a little bit, haven't we?
Yeah. I think what strikes me with this, the tensions and the conflicts, is that you actually do need people involved who are skilled in managing and mediating and having, you know, like that ideas bank that you suggested, or have experience of collaborating in other organisations or other, you know, community organisations, that then they can bring those ideas to the table and use them in a way that then supports the growth of that community group. Because if you've not seen that in action, you don't know about it, and it's, you know, you don't know what you don't know, but actually it's a really important thing to bring to these meetings.
I'm just going to head on, just in view of the time. We didn't choose a question there. Again, and Morag, do you want to speak to this one? Because I know that you had examples, or am I putting you on the spot?
No, you're fine. It's, you know, I think you know, there is the examples of the kind of the board set up at ACT, and I think they had something like 8 community positions on their 12-seat board to keep a balance. I hope I've got the figures correct there. Reviewing is in the structures, sort of Sharon's just mentioned as well, so it's set in stone, and attending each other's, if you do end up with a couple of different governance structures, for example, in the Rainforest Alliance, there might be local boards and steering groups, and then obviously you'll have some of the organisations have their boards and steering groups, and to make sure that there's a good overlap between the two and that you're always speaking. And I mean, transparency kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it, as being very open about communications and decision making and the processes that led to that sort of decision making. And I think language is really important. You know, it's not going to be transparent if everybody can't understand what's being said. And that's easily overlooked because we all get into policy speak or sort of specialist speak, and quite a lot of people in the community won't relate to that for various different reasons. So I'd say that's a really key part there as well. I'm just trying to look down at the next one. Yeah, I mean, the standards and objectives, that goes back to co-designing your kind of your ambitions, what you want to do, and then keep reviewing them. And then obviously your participatory monitoring and evaluation tells you if you're if your path is still good, you need to adjust.
Which I think is our next one, in fact. Okay, so
sorry.
we're almost yeah. I mean, it's just sort of highlighting that being open to revision. We've almost kind of said that in several different ways, that it's that you're setting out on a joint adventure. That might sound a bit famous five-ish, but it, as long as we recognise that we don't necessarily know what we're going to get as a result, and that we have to be open to that and open to evolving as we go, I think you're going to have a much richer kind of community engagement than something which says, well, we need to do this and then just go ahead and then make sure we've done it and then we can all go home.
Yeah, and you know, these aren't sequential ideas either in the guidance. I mean, obviously the part about meeting the community and finding out who's there and getting people around the table in the first place and finding out what's important to them is something it's good to do early. These things all overlap, kind of go back round in a circle as well. So, and it's very important that the participatory monitoring and evaluation is a continuous process, set off right from the beginning, not something you're looking to do at the end. Say if you're in a project for 5 years and then you know you're coming out, you're not doing that then, you're doing it all the way through. I think that's really important.
Brilliant. And I think that's somehow that's our final slide. I don't know if there's anybody hiding there who's desperate to say something.
Your last chance to ask any questions, everyone. Can I just add in there, I think, did somebody come in there?
No, it's me. I was just saying everyone's ready for their tea.
They must be. I think what's really important as well is that we don't forget that our communities now are much more diverse, and actually we want to make sure that our organisations, whatever that may be, at whatever level, council, group, whatever, that we have a fair representation of the people in our communities so that they can contribute their views from their perspectives. Can I please retype the link shown earlier? Of course I can, Jack. 1 second, I'll do that just now.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Sharon, and also something to be kind of continuously on top of as well, making sure that you're open and inclusive.
Yeah, it's not always easy, but it's sometimes we can forget.
Yeah.
There you go, Jack. That's him back in the chat for you. Can I thank you both very much for that? What was really a really informative session, and actually the journey that you've gone on to pull together those the guidance that you've written must have been fascinating. First and foremost, doing that research and hearing about community experience, but actually what you have created is a toolkit for people to use that really keeps them. It's the how to do it well of community engagement, and I think that's a terrific thing to have for people to look at, that's current, that's relevant, and it's based on your research, which is even more important. So it's almost a live reflection of what you've established on your engagement with communities. So thank you both very much. It was wonderful to chat with you.
Thank you for asking us. And just to say that we try to practice what we preach. So so we're really open to feedback and we'd love to hear from you. And yeah, let us know if anything resonated or or if you try using the question-led approach as well.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
You segued in beautifully there, Anna, because I've moved on to the feedback slide, which is a Community Woodland Association feedback form, just basically asking for a little bit of feedback on today's session, organisation, where you've found out about us, and if there's anything else we can do. Always useful to ensure that we are meeting the needs of our community members as well. Now, there are people in the chat. I'm just trying to bring that up to see. Jane, thanks everyone, very useful, and Christina and Katie are typing away, but I can't see what they're saying. Okay, great, very informative. You've started a new role and these questions are superb and wonderful. Thank you very much, everybody. So it's 5 o'clock. I am going to stop the recording.